Good morning, Washington, Georgetown specifically, as I'm told by two of my guests, Paula Dobriansky, former U.S. Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, and Michael Gfoeller, former U.S. political advisor and regional coordinator for the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq. And good afternoon to Carl Bildt in Stockholm. Carl Bildt is, of course, he is the former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Sweden. And also good afternoon to Dmitri Trenin, who is now heading the Carnegie Moscow Center, and he was former senior research fellow at the Institute of Europe in Moscow. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 19th E-Policy Circle of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. It is a pleasure to have you. It is always a great conversation, but this is really, as always, with you, a stellar of a cast. And thank you for agreeing to come on and join me for this conversation about what's happening in this very simple world where nothing is happening. So I want to start by giving each of you 4 minutes exactly to tell me what you have on mind. And then I would start in this case with Paula Dobriansky. Please, Paula Dobriansky, it's over to you.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here. And yes, greetings from Georgetown in Washington, D.C. As you know, one of the issues, of course, that's front and center, not only in the United States, but around the globe, is the fact that in the United States, we have our upcoming presidential elections. But what I want to address is an issue that's going to be sustained beyond the elections, and regardless of the outcome of the elections. And that happens to be great power competition. Competition among the United States, Russia, and China. I think that we will certainly witness a continuation of this strategic competition, and particularly here where US power will be challenged by Beijing and Moscow, and there will also be continued attempts to fragment our alliances. But let me go to the second. There's also an interesting development that has stemmed from the great power competition, in which I think you could say that the geopolitical landscape has shifted. And that is in terms of what constitutes new alignments, new coalitions, new partnerships. Let me mention 4 in those 4 very brief minutes. And that is, first, Russia and China have certainly expanded their relationship, politically, economically, militarily. And I think we're going to see a continuation of that expansion, of that expanded relationship. Secondly, I would pick out what the developments in the Indo-Pacific. They're very striking. Here, back in 2007, then Prime Minister Abe actually launched what was called the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which brought together Japan, Australia, the United States, and India. And that particular quad came about to counter China's actions in the South China Seas and just overall the rise of China. Well, if you look at it today, that quad has been expanded, it's been elevated, it's now operating at the ministerial level, and very significantly earlier this last year, in March and April of this year, you had other countries that were included in a discussion on economic issues. This included New Zealand, South Korea, and Vietnam. And what this portends in the Indo-Pacific is a new alignment of countries that are very concerned about China's actions, particularly one of the topics that is front and center happens to be supply chains. We look at over the last number of years, Japan, South Korea have been moving many of their critical industries out of China. And look at Sony, Samsung, electronics. They've moved out of China to India, to Thailand. So this is a key area. Let me mention the third. The third is Europe. I have witnessed in recent months a shift in Europe's thinking on how to handle the strategic competition. And by the way, here, China and Russia. With regard to China in particular, it's noteworthy. The EU held its annual summit with China. There was no final communique. There always has been, but there wasn't. And instead, there was a statement that was made which called attention to the issue of cyber and cyber attacks on Europe, human rights, the national security law of Hong Kong. And then let me also mention there was a recent poll, and even European attitudes have shifted. In the UK and also France, over 60% of the public have said that they're very concerned about the Chinese government and its actions. And the same in Germany, some 47% concerned about the Chinese government actions. I have one last, and I'm going to wrap up, and that is, so here, let me at least just say there's a shift in the thinking there. And also I'd say with regard to Russia, particularly because of the poisoning of Navalny. We've seen some direct actions related to that. Then we got Armenia, Azerbaijan, we got Belarus. The last one, Middle East. I have to end, and I'll end on this note. The historic, dramatic breakthrough of the diplomatic relations established between Israel and also the UAE and Bahrain, very groundbreaking. It really underscores the striking geopolitical shifts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. A lot to think about and a lot to enrich our discussion later on. But now we'll go to Carl Bildt. Please, 4 minutes to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And an honor and a pleasure to be with you. It would be even more of an honor and a pleasure to see all of you in person, but I hope that will happen at some point in time. Just some remarks on what I see as the slightly bigger trends. I'm trying to avoid sort of elections that are coming up in different countries. But say I normally try to think of the word in terms of 3 mega trends that we've been seeing for the past, say, 10 years. The first is that after, say, a quarter of a century, where the megatrend that we all talked about was globalization, the further rapid integration and that bringing prosperity and that bringing also somewhat of an easing of tension. I mean, not a black and white picture. There was 9/11, quite a number of different things, but I would say globalization was the trend. Now, as Paula said as well, the rise of geopolitical tension is clearly the dominating trends. We see the shift in power relationships, notably, of course, the rise of China, which is dramatic, but we also see other powers throwing their weight around. That might be Russia, that might be Turkey, that might be others that are doing it with destabilizing consequences. We also be living in an area of a slightly unpredictable, to put it in diplomatic terms, the United States. This will continue respectively. I think the rise of China will continue. If I just look at the sort of economic figures that we see coming out of the IMF at the moment, this year we have the European economies down, or the Euro economies in UK, down 8-10%, US economy down 4-5%, and the Chinese economy up 2%. China is the only place in the world that is growing. So the relative weight of China in the global economy as a result of the COVID crisis is actually increasing, and that has political effects further down the line. Second megatrend is, of course, the fact that we are leaving the industrial age and enter the digital age. That's a revolution that will change virtually everything in our societies over time. We are only in the beginning. What we see, and here the intersection between geopolitics and this is, of course, a race for control of the technologies that will shape the new future. We see it primarily between the US and China, but we see it elsewhere as well. And we'll also see the shift in demand for raw materials of different sorts because we're getting out of the fossil age. So it's not necessarily oil and gas that's going to be the raw materials of prime importance from geopolitics. It's other things, and semiconductors and rare earth minerals and those. That changes the geopolitical landscape. And then the third trend, which we've seen, is that we have left the age of, I call the politics of ideology, when we were discussing socialism and communism and those things. Dmitri might remember some of these things. And we are entering the age of the politics of identity. It is ethnic, it is cultural, it is nationalist issues that are dominating the politics in all of our countries. The interrelationship between these 3 trends is that we are entering, or have entered, a far more turbulent and far more unpredictable time. And of course, that is, I think, something that in the one way or other is going to continue to dominate the reality for the the years that are ahead of us that we have any possibility of having views on.
Thank you very much, Carl Bildt. Yes, it is turbulent times coming up, and we will discuss where are these turbulent times going to be more acute worldwide when we engage in our discussion. But let me go to right now to Dmitri Trenin. 4 minutes to you, Dmitri. Tell us what you've got.
Did you hear me?
Now I do. Now you can.
Very good. Thank you very much, Raghida. Thank you for this invitation. I subscribe to every word that Carl has just said, all the mega trends, absolutely. I very much appreciate Paula's tour d'horizon as far as particularly US foreign policy is concerned. So let me add my 2 topics based on essentially 3 things that I see that can't be easily subsumed within what Paula and Carl have just laid out. One, something very close to home, the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh in the South Caucasus. It is, to me, a sign of the times, the way this conflict is developing. This is one of the frozen conflicts that remain frozen for, as they say, it's not an accident. This is something that exemplifies some of the major trends shaping global and regional geopolitics. I think my takeaways from that conflict are as follows. What is frozen will melt. And I think we need to take a very close look at a lot of frozen conflicts around the world that we thought would remain frozen forever. My second takeaway is that the mechanisms, international mechanisms of mediation and keeping the status quo that essentially satisfies the international players, these mechanisms fail to perpetuate the status quo. Again, we need to look at these mechanisms with a very hard eye and see what works, what doesn't. My third point is that in many of these regional conflicts, and Nagorno-Karabakh is an example of that, the 2 superpowers of the 21st century world, the United States of America and the People's Republic of China, will not be directly involved, not be really very much interested. They're staying away, which takes me to point 4. My 4th takeaway is that the regional powers, the countries in the region, in this case, Russia, Turkey, Iran, will have a much bigger role than they would have had in a bipolar world dominated by the United States and China. Coming to the US election, I think what I expect is more change of style in US foreign policy and less change of substance. I think that the United States will stay focused on its domestic needs, domestic problems, which are many and serious. I think that the United States will remain focused on China. Russia is more of an add-on. I think that the focus very much is on China, will continue to be on China, whoever wins the election. This major power competition is essentially between Washington and Beijing. And 3, I think the United States will be leaning harder on allies. It will be the time when the United States will be asking the allies what they are doing for the United States, not what the United States will be doing for them.
That's absolutely.
As far as Russia is concerned, I think the relationship is going to be bad and even deteriorate no matter who wins in the US. And very lastly, although I spoke about bipolarity in the 21st century world between the United States and China, I do not see, at least for now, I do not see a bloc division the way we experienced during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, which means that other powers, bigger powers, smaller powers, medium powers, will have a chance to play bigger roles. I'm talking about Europe, I'm talking about India, I'm talking about Japan and Russia. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much. Good timing for stopping. And now I'm going to, again, Dmitri, I think the three of you are bringing in such rich elements to the conversation. I'm going to be fascinated by listening to this engagement amongst the three or four of you, rather. I still have one more person, and that is Michael Gfoeller. 4 minutes to you strictly. Michael Gfoeller.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Now I can speak. Very good. Thank you, Raghida. I'll be. I promise to do 3.5 minutes there. I don't want to steal your time. Yes, I would like to echo what His Excellency Dr. Bildt said regarding the technological revolution. In my latest incarnation, I'm sitting on the board of an artificial intelligence company that's working on predictive analytics using all sorts of mathematical tools. And if anything, he may have understated the case a little bit. I mean, in this country, we're really looking at an economic revolution taking place in the coming decade, thanks to artificial intelligence. Vast categories of jobs will be eliminated or transformed beyond recognition. Just to give you one example, everyone knows about self-driving cars. It's actually one of the simplest applications of AI in mathematical terms, but it's going to have a tremendous impact. The #1 career field for American men who lack a college education is driver. They're truck drivers, they're chauffeurs, they're taxi drivers. Within a decade, all of these jobs will be done by artificial intelligences. There will be a wave of unemployment as that particular job category is eliminated. The same thing will happen in higher status professions. Pretty soon in the United States, it will be illegal to have a surgical operation that is not carried out by an artificial intelligence because the precision of these machines is just so high. I would remind everyone about Moore's law, which has been doing pretty well predicting pretty well the development of computer technology since 1975. It says briefly that the capacity of computer technology to process information doubles every 18 months. This is why people like Ray Kurzweil are predicting that we'll have functional artificial intelligence in the sense of programs that replicate human intelligence by 2030. I think that's almost certainly true. So that's going to transform the United States economy, at least in our country. It's going to drive a renewed domestic political emphasis on the labor market. Unemployed workers will still vote, and it'll probably drive the continuing trend toward focus on domestic affairs. It'll distract us from foreign policy to a large extent. So that's one mega trend. I think you'll see the same trends happening across the world. And what happens to the poor and less stable countries in the world that don't have the financial and economic muscle of the United States when they largely disappear or excluded from a transformed international division of labor? That's going to drive extremism and nationalism, I think, in a whole host of countries. And refugee flows, right? Particularly economic migrants. So I think those are some of the real question is, can the global political elite deal with this challenge? Can it deal with the political challenges coming out of a technological revolution that will lead us, if we manage the politics correctly, to a new age of abundance? I'm not sure we can. We'll have to see. The big challenge will be politics, not technology. I'd like to echo what Dr. Trenin said about Nagorno-Karabakh. Just remind everyone, this is the largest war in Asia at this time. Tens of thousands of people are fighting on both sides. After just 3 weeks of fighting, the casualties are already number in the thousands. This is a long conflict that goes back way before 1988. And I really think that Russia will have to play the key role in resolving it. Only Russia can reach out to all sides, at a high level with a great deal of influence. It represents, I want to point out, the Nagorno-Karabakh war represents a significant threat to the territorial integrity of Iran. 20 million Azeri Turks live in Iran. They're the second largest population group after ethnic Persians. And so the government of Tehran has to be very careful as it seeks to balance its own position between Baku and Yerevan. If they lean too far toward Yerevan, it could cause significant domestic instability.
All right, Michael, I was going to go to the elections, US elections, but why don't I stay a little bit with this issue? Because we're going to go to Karabakh and what the four of you have been talking about. Let me go to Dmitri. Do you agree that only Russia can solve this, but isn't Russia possibly in the danger of being pulled in to the conflict because of its security pact with Armenia if things get out of hand? And do you think there is a role for the United States to come in and say to Turkey, maybe it's time to just hold your horses a little bit. I go to you first, Dmitri, and tell me if Russia feels really comfortable, or does it feel intimidated by what, well, let's put it this way. Does President Vladimir Putin feel very well in his skin, or does he feel intimidated or angry with Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan? Dmitri, you can go first.
Well, first of all, I think that there's always a role for the United States. The issue is whether the United States wants to play that role or any role in this or that conflict. That's a question that only the United States can answer. The United States, of course, can do a lot in a lot of places. Second, with regard to Russia, this conflict became a war rather than another skirmish, rather than remaining another skirmish, thanks to the increase of Turkish interest and Turkish influence in the South Caucasus. At some point, I think the balance of power that was tilting toward Azerbaijan for 3 decades, or slightly less than 3 decades, was going to lead to an attempt to replay the war that Azerbaijan lost in the early 1990s. But this time, Azerbaijan got a lot of help, a lot of guidance, I would even say, and encouragement from Turkey and Russia, which in the past managed
from
to.
Israel too, Dmitri Trenin.
Oh yes,
Address
absolutely.
That would, yes, go ahead.
Right. Israel did supply military hardware systems, but Turkey was politically, strategically involved. And I think that made the difference. Had it not been for Turkey, I think Russia would have been able to stop the conflict, to nip it in the bud, as it did earlier this year, as it did in 2016, as it did on other occasions. So Russia is not looking at the situation as being comfortable. In fact, it's very discomforting. And Russia is looking at the Turkish challenge in much broader terms than the Caucasus, and certainly much broader than Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yes, Libya, for example, it takes me to Carl Bildt, because later I'll go to Paula Dobriansky, because I want to go back to the elections with you on top of this conversation, Paula Dobriansky, but I'll go to Carl Bildt first. Turkey is really feeling rather empowered. I don't know what makes the leader, the president of Turkey, feel so empowered. And it seems that Europe is rather sort of hesitant or weak or not interested. I don't think it's not interested because it's afraid of the revival of the Daesh, the ISIS element of the immigration, forced immigration, of opening the door. Carl Bildt, shed some light for us on why Turkey feels so empowered and could get away with it. And could you also address the issue of Iran that Michael Gfoeller referred to when he was speaking about Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan and Turkey? Please, Carl Bildt.
Well, I started with Iran. I mean, they have, for partly the reason Michael mentioned, they've been extremely careful to be as neutral as they can. The fact that they have not only fighting on their border, in certain cases they even have fighting affecting them across the border. So it requires an amount of patience, but so far they've been very quiet. Overall, I think the explanation with Turkey and others lies in what Dmitri said. We are in a situation where there is not this sort of bipolar world where sort of other powers feel more contained and constrained. We are in a world where sort of medium powers, or whatever we call them, can do things in a way they couldn't do before. Turkey uses that. And there are 2 reasons for it, I think, or several reasons for it. One is the domestic situation. I mean, President Erdogan knows that if on present trends, he faced difficulties in the election in 23. Nationalism is always good. I mean, sort of, I can think of X numbers of countries where sort of leaders who have been in difficulties have been sort of boosting their popularity by some successes. And he has so far, sort of grudgingly granted, been fairly successful. The intervention that he did in Libya did work. He has demonstrated tactical and political capabilities. I think this is a more daring adventure. I think what he's done is sort of the situation with Greeks is not black and white. With Cyprus, more complicated. He's throwing his weight around as long as he succeeds.
Yes, but is he being allowed to succeed, Carl Bildt?
Well, he's allowed to succeed because we have in a world.
Being allowed. Is he being allowed? And what factors?
In this particular world, there's more room for medium powers, I think someone else said it, to throw their weight around. Who can constrain him? Can the Americans do it? I doubt it. Europeans can't. Iranians can't. Who can constrain Russia? Difficult to say as well. We are in a sort of more turbulent world.
For Dobriansky, who can constrain? I mean, is the US not willing or unable to constrain President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as he goes into his adventures in Turkey, in Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan, etc., etc. And especially that he's accused, at least by some, especially Russia, that he is trying to revive the capabilities of ISIS. And every time the Russians try to say something, he waves Idlib in their face. Not that I'm on Russia's side on any of this. I'm just putting to you what I've learned. Dmitri will correct me if I'm wrong, but to you, Paula Dobriansky, please.
Well, my response to it is, first of all, the relationship with Turkey is a complex one. It has been a complex one. And when I look at every US administration, whether it be a Democrat or Republican, each has had to deal very carefully with Turkey. Why? Because Turkey, at times, we have witnessed it's aligned with Russia. We have witnessed at times it is doing its own or following its own path, the path set forth by Erdogan. And then also we know very well in terms of recent Middle East crises, Syria being one, where there's also an alignment. So there isn't a simple answer. I think one has to look at each situation. But let me make these comments. I think that first, the fact is that the US has been following closely the situation. In fact, there was, with the recent, just October 16, the missile, S-400 missile fire test. By the way, the US Congress, even in the midst of our elections, has indicated that it is on the verge of deploying sanctions and wants to put sanctions in place. So there's interest. Secondly, though, I think that Dmitri well articulated Russia's interests and where Russia has been on this, where it is now. And Russia also was the first mediator. Now I understand that when that didn't unfold in the last week, it's over to France. But Russia has certain a stake, certain interests clearly in the resolution. But so do other countries in this, because no one wants this to get out of hand. And I'll make one last point that Dmitri mentioned in his own comment about international mechanisms or institutional mechanisms. It's striking that there have been a number of articles in the US about the situation recently and what Turkey's doing. And it was said why earlier in the summer, that when Turkey was providing actually and undertaking military exercises and supporting military exercises in Azerbaijan, why at that time was there no kind of negotiation or effort to stem the tide? That maybe we wouldn't be where we are now if we had taken, and there had been certain measures taken then. Okay. I do think, and I'll conclude on this, I do think that a comment made about regional powers is apt, and I think we already seen it. I went and looked at great power competition, but great power competition also impacts regional powers, right, as we know very well in terms of arms being given to a variety of countries, whether be it Turkey that we're talking about or Iran, for example.
Very good. I want to get back to Iran and the US in the conversation later on. Michael Gfoeller, like in 1 minute, because I want to get to the elections with you. Does it make sense to you? Or first of all, is it true that Turkey is taking some fighters that are in Syria, and that Turkey had taken along, if you will, with the Turkey to Libya, and now Turkey is taking such fighters to the Nagorno-Karabakh fight? Is it true that this is the case? In which case, does that mean it's ISIS elements plus Al-Nusra, etc.? And secondly, if this is the case, does it make sense that it is Turkey and Israel who are the suppliers of arms and they are allies in this situation, knowing that Israel claims that it is going to fight ISIS wherever and however? Can you address these points for me, Michael Gfoeller?
I'll do my best in 1 minute. So Israel's interest in Azerbaijan is clear. Azerbaijan is one of the two top suppliers of oil and oil products to Israel. That's a long-standing, economic interest. In addition, Azerbaijan is a major arms market for the Israeli arms industry. And so there are two major links right there. And thirdly, an alliance, or not an alliance really, but a relationship with Azerbaijan gives Israel extra geopolitical leverage vis-a-vis Iran, which is its primary concern in the region. So I think these are the motivating factors behind Israel's stance in this particular conflict. Obviously, the Armenians are not very happy with this. They see themselves, with the Jews, as one of the two nations that underwent a genocide in the 20th century, and they don't understand why there's more Israeli sympathy and support for their own position. What was the rest of the question?
Let's see now. What was the rest of the question? I was asking about the Israeli Turkish.
The foreign fighters. There's no question but the thousands of foreign fighters have been transferred, mostly from Idlib province, by Turkey into the Nagorno-Karabakh theater. I talk with Armenian friends every day about this. They're showing up with great frequency on the battlefield. There appear to be several thousand of them.
And my question is that
there also were military exercises. Sorry, I just wanted to add a two-finger. There also were military exercises, as I mentioned, that had been taking place for months.
So I want to give the floor to Carl Bildt because he wants to come in, but just somebody put some sense in my head as how can I understand that Israel is helping Turkey bring in the fighters, the Daesh or the Nusra fighters from Syria to Nagorno-Karabakh to fight in Armenia. I mean, how would that make sense? And how come the US doesn't just say, excuse me, Israel, you are an ally and you cannot do that. You cannot really be an accomplice to Turkey in bringing the fighters from Idlib into Europe, into a friend called Armenia. Carl Bildt, to you on this one, or whatever else you wanted to come in with, because you had two fingers as well.
Yes, I had on this particular latest one. I very much doubt that the Israelis have been involved in that transportation of the fighters. I think that's a Turkish thing. Otherwise, I mean, Michael explains the nature of the very strong, long-standing Israeli-Azerbaijan connection. I mean, that's a strong one. It has been there for a very long time. But I want to say something else concerning this conflict and really sort of say something, and would like to have a comment from Dmitri. I would suspect that Moscow and Ankara, the second and the third Rome, sort of both think that they can, at the end of the day, settle this and be happy if they can do it. Americans away, Chinese away, and perhaps the Iranians in. The big regional powers, Astana combination, should develop a relationship that sort things out. It might be bumpy road to that particular end station, but isn't that where things might be heading, for better or worse?
Dmitri, you want to answer that quickly? But please, Carl Bildt, I was not suggesting that Israel was transporting the fighters from Syria to Azerbaijan or to Nagorno-Karabakh. I was saying it is a partner with Turkey and in arms and supplying arms, and therefore when Turkey is transferring such elements, then it is an accomplice in that mission. Dmitri, Trenin, you want to come in on this and answer what Carl Bildt had put to you?
Thank you. Carl, I think this is precisely Turkey's objective, and this was laid out very succinctly and very clearly by the Turkish foreign minister. He basically said that they are open in Ankara to a resolution of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh with Russia based on the Idlib formula. Now, the problem is that Russia does not and would not recognize Turkey as a co-equal in the South Caucasus. So Idlib, although this is part of Turkey's near neighborhood, if you like, there Russia can deal with Turkey as co-equals, but not in the former Soviet Union. But eventually, I think whatever the status of Russia and Turkey in the ultimate resolution, there will have to be a Russian-Turkish understanding about the South Caucasus for the conflict to be stabilized. I'm not saying resolved, but stabilized.
Paula Dobriansky, quickly, because I want to go to the elections and then
very quick. It's connected. I wanted to also ask Dmitri. Dmitri, what do you see as the next step then? As I understand, France is the negotiator, but what do you see as the next step leading to a resolution?
Dmitri, do you agree that France is the negotiator? Not to my knowledge, I mean, but you know better. Dmitri, do you want to address this question?
France is a co-chair of the Minsk group, of course.
And is it active? Is it useful? Are you betting the Minsk group?
That's part of the problem. What President Macron said did not go well with President Aliyev, who basically accused France of being on the side of Armenia rather than an impartial mediator. Now I think I hear from the French ambassador in Baku that they had patched it up. I don't know what the actual state of things is, but for Azerbaijan and Turkey, France is clearly tilted toward Armenia. So that's where we are. And now resolution is a long way off. What we're talking about is a military standstill. What we're talking about is a ceasefire that holds. That's the first step.
Michael Gfoeller, let me go to the American elections. I want to ask you bluntly, who will win the elections? Is it President Trump or Vice President Joe Biden?
Speaking as an independent voter, neither Republican nor Democrat, I think President Trump will probably win in both the popular vote and the Electoral College. I think most of the polling, just as in 2016, it's essentially paid for by political parties, and therefore it reflects their desiderata. One should ignore it, I think, to a large extent. The best polling research I've seen is based on the pattern of votes cast in the primaries. And they have actually a much higher accuracy, and they show Trump winning a large majority in the Electoral College. This is the same same teams, came up with this result in 2016. I think they're right again. I think what is driving Trump's campaign, the main sources of its strength are the fact that unemployed and underemployed industrial workers are going to vote for him in large measure. And here's a big idea for you. The Republican Party in the United States has become transformed. It's no longer the party of large business owners. It's now the Labor Party. Some people over here jokingly refer to the Republican Party as the Trump Labor Party. They're not far off the mark. And if you look at who attends his rallies, you can see it.
Michael Gfoeller, if President Trump is re-elected, what does it mean to this region where you served in the Middle East? And will there be continuity of his doctrine, as it's called? And what shape will that? Everybody has sort of predicted that the issue of China would remain the same, whether it's Trump or Biden. But in terms of the relationship with Iran, if it is President Trump, how will this relationship develop? Will we see confrontation? Since you predicted it's President Trump, I'll stop there, unless you want to say something, should you be wrong and it's Joe Biden president. Go ahead.
I'll just talk about what will happen if Trump, it seems very likely, wins. Obviously, the sanctions will continue vis-a-vis Iran and be intensified. Their crushing impact on the Iranian economy will continue. Iran's oil exports will continue to be severely constrained. I think Iran's going to come under a great deal of internal political strain because of the gravitational pull of the Nagorno-Karabakh war and its Azeri population. That's been a long-time concern of Tehran ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, as a matter of fact, as Dmitri knows very well. Trump will maintain a very strong alliance with the UAE and with Saudi Arabia. the U.S. will continue its efforts to encourage Saudi Arabia to establish formal relations with Israel, and will maintain strong relations with our traditional allies in the region, including Israel and Egypt. Trump will do everything he can to maintain U.S. influence in the Middle East while avoiding entry into any new wars or military conflicts. He's going to try to he'll continue to draw down our involvement in the existing conflicts in a way, as much as he can, in a way consistent with U.S. interests.
That's very clear. Paula Dobriansky, predictions on elections and impact on relations with Iran and policy in the Middle East, please.
I'm going to be able to give you a very brief answer because I agree with everything that Michael Gfoeller said. So let me just, start. I think he is correct. I also agree that President Trump will be victorious in the upcoming election. But the thing that I would add is that here, I think the issues that also matter in this, the economy. During the coronavirus period, it's been very tough, but yet he has managed it where the unemployment has gone down significantly. People have taken note of that. Small businesses, it matters greatly. And also the issue of how he has dealt with the kinds of riots, the looting that has taken place, and in terms of putting in place a rule of law and emphasizing the kinds of steps that need to be taken in order to deal with that looting. And then with regard to the Middle East, the only thing that I would add, because I think Michael articulated it very well, is I believe that certainly with regard to Iran, it will be the continuation of maximum pressure and sanctions. But with regard to the historic alignment of Israel with the UAE and Bahrain, I think that we are going to see an emphasis on Saudi Arabia in terms of it having diplomatic relations with Israel.
Very fascinating, quite indeed. Carl Bildt, you don't vote in the United States, but you do have your point of view as to you follow. What do you predict? Who's victor, if you wish to predict a victory for either Donald Trump or Joe Biden? But if you don't want to predict, can you tell me how do you project their policies will impact Europe and this region in particular? I'm talking about Iran.
Well, I'm very good at predicting elections in Sweden, so I'm normally wrong on Sweden. So as I
predict and be wrong on the US. Go ahead. We'll say you have said that.
We've had two Americans who are sort of far more knowledgeable and who feel the smell of the election campaign. And also, as an active politician, I know that 2 weeks is a very long time in politics. Particularly during election campaigns, anything can happen. Will it make a difference? You talk about Iran. Yeah, Biden, if it is a Biden win, he has made clear, CNN, he wrote a thing, that it would be sort of a clean return to JCPOA, clean compliance from both sides. Slightly easier said than done, but I think that will be facilitated then by European, Russian, Chinese diplomacy. How that can be arranged. If it's a Trump on Iran, as said, maximum pressure. I heard Trump saying the other day that he expects then the Iranians will very soon ask for negotiations. I don't think so. I think we should be aware of the fact that there's a significant faction in Tehran that actually wants Trump to win because they have an interest in continued confrontation. They have no interest whatsoever into going into negotiations. And even if sanctions continue, I mean, we see that with Venezuela and other places. I mean, it can go on for a very long time. And it often sort of makes that sort of regime even more secure because we go back to what we talked about earlier, playing on nationalist things. So continued confrontation then in the Middle East, I think the place that will suffer the most is Iraq, because Iraq will be the battleground. Even more than it has been so far, which of course is slightly worrying. Lebanon, perhaps somewhat less, but still.
I want you to elaborate a bit, if you don't mind, Carl Bildt, about the dangers for Iraq and Lebanon. Can you elaborate what do you mean and why do you put both Iraq and Lebanon in the forefront of danger?
No, primarily Iraq, because the Iraq is, I mean, ethnic composition or whatever. We have substantial American interests, although they are withdrawing. We have substantial historical Iranian interests. And it's a very emotional issue in Iran that goes back to the Iran-Iraq War, which was the formative experience of practically everyone who's in power in Tehran today. And it's where the US is vulnerable. So if there's a stepped up confrontation, we've already seen it. I mean, Secretary Pompeo the other day threatened to close down the American embassy in Baghdad if there are more rocket attacks. Whether those rocket attacks are controlled by Tehran or not, who knows? But you can see all of these scenarios played out.
All right. I'm going to go to Dmitri Trenin. Are you going to venture into predictions, Dmitri Trenin? And I want to ask you immediately after you answer me about the elections prediction. I have a couple of questions for you on the US and Russia in light of the relationship with Iran, in particular, if Russia decides to resume selling arms or to increase selling arms, if it is doing so secretly to Iran, and the threats of crippling sanctions by the US against Russia. First, predictions. Is it true that Russia would rather have Donald Trump continue because they don't want Joe Biden to come and remind them of the fight and the accusations regarding intervention, Russian intervention in the elections, the alleged Russian intervention in the elections, and the downfall of Hillary Clinton? Too many questions. Go, Dmitri Trenin.
Well, I think that if Donald Trump wins the election, Russia will be punished by U.S. Congress pretty severely for that win. If it's Joe Biden, Russia will be punished by the U.S. Congress and the White House. So I don't think that Russia stands to gain whichever way the election goes in the United States. But I would not make a prediction myself.
Okay, go ahead. On the issue of sanctions, okay, let me recap what I said. The administration had been very clear, and it's going to stay in power for a while, even if Biden is elected. The administration of Donald Trump made clear that if China and Russia go ahead and supply Iran with arms now after October 18, when it says that they have the legal right to do so, and that there's going to be crippling sanctions coming your way. Do you have an idea how crippling they will be, and will they really impact your economy? And is it worth it to go ahead and supply the arms to Iran for such a big price? What if they just say, SWIFT, you're out of SWIFT, just as an example?
Well, I think Russia has been sitting in the shadow of those potentially crippling sanctions hanging over its head for the past several years. Russia has been looking at Iran as a potential example of what might befall Russia. I think that it's important to understand that the U.S.-Russia relationship at this point is so bad that the only real item on the agenda is preventing the two countries from inadvertently slipping into a military collision. That's where we are. So I think Russia is bracing for even the worst possible scenarios, and they're coming up with their own answers even now to being switched off with SWIFT and many other things.
Okay, because I'm sitting in Lebanon, I want to beg your patience, and I want, before I give you your 1.5 minute or 2 minutes at the end for your concluding remarks, I'm sitting here in this very wounded Beirut, the city that has suffered with an amazing and probably unprecedented explosion due to, storing these incredible amounts of prohibited material amongst civilians. Yeah. And then we have a situation where the outside players, in particular Iran, the godfather of Hezbollah, preventing the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, of coming in the very beginning. And now the good old players in this country, the ruling class that have lost any sense of dignity, going back and forth and bargaining over their shares while the country just slips into an abyss, quite honestly. I want to have 30 seconds from each of you. Where do you see this country going? What is your own country doing about it? Dmitri, start with you. What's Russia? What does Russia want from Lebanon? Why is it letting its ally do what it's contributing to this downfall? Why don't you care?
Well, I don't think Russia has much leverage with Iran over what Iran can do in Lebanon. I think Russia certainly supports a Lebanon that is active and thriving and prosperous and all that. There is something that Russia, in principle, could do, and I think it's doing a few things to restrain those who would want to tear Lebanon apart. But if we're talking about the Lebanese themselves, the Lebanese political class, and since we have, as Carnegie, we have a center in Beirut, I hear a lot of reports about what's happening in Lebanon. I think it's beyond Russia's reach. It's very much the issue for the Iranian people, for the Lebanese people and for the Lebanese elites. And unfortunately, the elites are not doing a good job.
That's right. Carl Bildt, we're not right on your borders, but we're almost neighbors. Why don't you care about us? I mean, why isn't it, why don't you just stand up and say this is not allowed to happen? There has to be accountability, there has to be an ending of impunity, there has to be a respect of sovereignty. Why are you silent about these things when it comes to Lebanon, Carl Bildt?
Well, I think all of these things are said from the European side, but do we have any leverage? I mean, historically, of course, Lebanon, a very complicated place. I wouldn't claim to be an expert anyhow, but Lebanon has been more or less okay when all of the other powers have an interest in the stability of Lebanon. When the powers diverge and don't have that interest, then Lebanon suffers. Then you have war and conflict in Lebanon. So what is happening in Lebanon is, of course, a reflection of what we see overall in the Middle East. Saudis, Iranians, others, Israelis sometimes maneuvering in Lebanon. And if that can be overcome, at the end of the day, it's up to the Lebanese themselves. I mean, President Macron has been there twice, trying to do things. I think he's the only sort of leader of that magnitude from any country that has been there since the horrible explosion. And that shows, of course, a commitment due to historical reasons.
Paula Dobriansky, on Lebanon, is the US doing enough? Is it sanctions enough? Are they harmful?
In terms of our very hard-hitting policy toward Iran and Iran's support for the proxy of Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has really harmed Lebanon's own particular path forward, my answer would be yes. And as you asked the question before, that will be a continuation in a future Trump administration if elected. That there will be that continuation of even harder sanctions, because the connection of Iran and what Iran is doing in Lebanon, I think, is of serious proportions. I'd also add something in this mix. You're focusing on governments. I want to also say, to me, I'm very struck, particularly with the recent tragedy, of the outpouring of the Lebanese American community and the kind of humanitarian assistance. It's not just governmental, but there's also that connection into Lebanon. I can't tell you how connected we are in that regard by the sheer nature of also the Lebanese American community.
As you know, I'm a Lebanese American myself, so I do what I can wherever to echo the pain that the people here are suffering. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to you, Michael Gfoeller, about Lebanon, and then I'm going to ask you to do your 1-minute conclusion, and then I go backward so that we can conclude on time before we have a cutoff of electricity. I'm sorry, I get emotional when it comes to Lebanon, because if you are here, it's really painful. You don't want to drive to Beirut. It's so dark in every way. And when you look at the horizon of what's going on, it is a crime against humanity, what happened, and crime, continued crime for the politicians to go on ruining this country and turning it into poverty. Sorry, Michael Gfoeller, to you.
So I would like to agree with what Paula just said. I think she summed it up very well. We're going to see an intensification of sanctions on Iran, and one of the main goals of the sanctions is to block Iranian funding for groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen. Eventually, these flows of money will dry up. The Iranian government will no longer be able to fund these foreign adventures. I remember during the various waves of protests that have taken place in Iran over the last year and a half, which are woefully underreported in our press, but covered very nicely in the press organs in UAE and other countries in the Gulf, people chanting in the streets, "No Lebanon, no Yemen, where's our money, bring it home." I mean, you know, they're at the point now in budgetary terms where they can't fund basic domestic needs, pay salaries, and also fund these terror groups. Yes. And so it's, I think that policy will continue until the funding for Hezbollah and other groups is cut off.
1 minute conclusion for you. In fact, make it as 45 seconds if you can, so that I could fit you all in. Go ahead, Michael, start with you, and then I go backward with the order by which we began.
Okay, so I want to strike a positive note here at the end and say, you know, we should all recall, we specialists in foreign relations, that the technological chessboard we're playing on when we talk about foreign relations, the economic chessboard is moving and changing shape. We should not assume that things will always be as they have been. One of the most remarkable developments in recent years is the development of this energy alliance between Moscow and Riyadh, the two capitals that now do the most of anyone to control oil prices in the world. And yet inevitably the role of oil will fade. And this will have a big impact on the US oil industry as well. Over here, electric car sales are going through the roof, and the price of electricity panels, solar panels, has fallen from 1975 until today, from $77 per watt to 16 cents. This trend will continue and produce huge economic and geopolitical shifts in the Middle East. We need to use politics to handle the backdraft from all of that.
Thank you very much, Michael Gfoeller. Dmitri, Trenin, 40 seconds to you, please. We need to wrap up.
Well, I think 2020 will be remembered as the year when US-China rivalry turned into confrontation. And this sends a very important, and I would say chilling message to the rest of the world. We need to adjust to that and not repeat the division of the world into blocks that happened during the Cold War.
Thank you very much, Dmitri, Trenin. Carl, Bildt, to you. 40 seconds.
With every word of Michael and every word of Dmitri, just one other factor that we didn't mention. We are in the beginning of the next phase of the demographic transition. The age of Asia will be replaced by, or will be supplemented by, the age of Africa. Just two figures. Year 2000, not that long ago, there were sort of roughly the equal number of people in Europe and in Africa. Roughly.
As the electricity.
Yes, yes. Carl Bildt, please continue, Carl Bildt. Now we're back. Electricity did get cut off. I did warn you.
Okay.
Carl Bildt, finish your thoughts, please. You go ahead, Carl Bildt. Sorry for the interruption.
I'm fine. You were out there, but I finished my short pitch for Africa.
All right. Well deserved. And I'm going to go to Paula Dobriansky. And
I have just 20 seconds. Mine is going to be 20 seconds. I want to underscore what Carl Bildt said at the beginning, but we didn't really get a chance to talk about. He said the industrial age, we've moved into the digital age. He's quite right, and that should be a topic of one of your future circles. That's my strong recommendation. It's worth discussing.
Absolutely.
Here.
That's great. So we should have one, and you helped me shape it, and you are welcome back. And I would love to have you both and all of you. But definitely, this is a good suggestion. Keep your suggestions coming, because it seems that we're going to go on for a while before we hold our summit physically, which I love you all to come to. And it's going to be in Abu Dhabi, edition 4 of Beirut Institute Summit. Hopefully, we were hoping March, we don't know, COVID will decide, but definitely, God willing, in 2021 in Abu Dhabi. But let me share with you my wonderful guests for next week. As usual, great cast, always fabulous. I'm just so honored. We have Sir Jeremy Greenstock, Chairman of UN Association of the UK, the Gatehouse Advisory Partners, and of Lambert Energy Advisory. He served as the UK Ambassador to the United Nations and Special Representative of the UK for Iraq. Nassif Hatti, he is Lebanon's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, only recently actually, former Ambassador of the League of Arab States to France, Italy, the Holy See, and UNESCO. We have Terry Rod Larson, many of you know who he is. He is President of IPI, former UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Special Envoy on behalf of the UNSG. He negotiated the Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon, the Syrian military withdrawal from Lebanon. He was a central figure in the secret negotiations between the PLO and Israel that led to the Oslo Accords. And then we have Edward Lotwak. He is strategist, historian, and contractual government advisor. He is the author of The Rise of China versus the Logic of Strategy, Coup d'etat, a practical handbook, and also of grand strategy of the Byzantine Empire. I thank you. It's been marvelous. You enlightened me. You honored me. I have learned so much from all of you, and it's been a lot of fun seeing you all. Thank you very much. Until I see you again. Have a good day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Raghida.
Thank you, Raghida.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.